There are some people who go back right into building. And for some, it's great because I mean, some of the best founders I know, they're actually builders. They're builders who build stuff from 0 to 1. Their best use of talent is really keep building things and then selling them. And I know some people who are super successful at that. And that's a skill I have deep respect because it's not my skill. My skill is really seeing something that is there and making it bigger.
Tim Schumacher is the exited founder and former CEO of Sedo, one of the world's largest domain marketplaces, which he led for over a decade before stepping down 13 years ago. What sets Tim apart is how he mastered the elusive work-life balance while still building his company, something most entrepreneurs only dream of. This balance helped him avoid the emotional roller coaster that so many of us face after a successful exit. In this episode, Tim shares his thoughts on keeping life supernormal, the bootstrapper mindset, being a scaler versus a 0 to 1 founder, and finding new purpose in tackling climate change. Hello, Tim. So good to have you in my studio today.
Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So why don't we go back to that moment 13 years ago when you just exited Sedo.com? I want to know how you felt.
So, interesting question, and I guess for me that it wasn't that one time. Although the 13 years ago, you hit it right. That was the time when I exited Sedo and I stopped being the CEO and I went out. So that was an exit in terms of, okay, before my life was focused on one company. And then after a little bit of a transition time, my life was, I had a lot of time, but it was purely a time thing 13 years ago. My actual exit was many years before. It was kind of came in stages. And I think that's differentiating us a little bit from many usual founder exits. We did one exit where we sold a portion, then another portion, then we took the rest public through an existing shell. And so it was kind of a staged exit. But yeah, probably, and so that part was very gradual, but definitely the exit of me as a CEO and founder is kind of leaving my baby. That was 13 years ago. And that, in retrospect, was the bigger change in life than making an exit and getting some money in return for some shares you sold. We sold, which is obviously a very virtual thing. Still life changing, but more in the long run. But yeah, I still remember that when I left as a CEO, I suddenly had a lot of free time. We went on a holiday in New Zealand for a few weeks. And suddenly the days were empty, and in a good way though, because being bored in a positive sense, I never had a time in my life where I was so open for starting new things and doing new things without any pressure, without any team, without anything. And I think that was my. So it was a feeling. Since you asked me, it was a feeling of, on the one side, anxiety, what's next? On the other side, also relief, because I've done Sedo for a very long time, and I've been really trying to work towards that time when I actually could turn over to my successor as the CEO. But yeah, then also quite a bit of boredom was the feeling, which then I started to fill with other things. I guess those three things were the main feelings.
All right. So you felt bored, and how did you go about that?
I had started even before that. I had started some angel investments, and I got more involved into them, and I started to do more of them because I really enjoyed that part. I enjoyed talking to new founders. I enjoyed, growing companies. I've always enjoyed that, and one of the businesses which I then happened to actually spend the majority of my time, or two businesses over the next couple of years, were one. I had done the angel investment before. Was the company behind AdBlock Plus, the now world's leading ad blocker. The company name is IO, but most people know it by the name of AdBlock. And I got quite involved during that time into taken that company was a fledgling little startup with just a few employees, and helping my co-founder to grow that. And the other business was, and that investment came during that time, after I left Sedo, which was the green search engine ecosia.org. It's a green search engine that plants trees. Works like Google, but then it takes the money, to plant trees. And so it's essentially a philanthropic effort, but with the means
Yeah.
of technology.
Hmm.
And back then, I actually, I got involved there, and helped them to scale over the coming years. And so yeah, I fairly quickly went into those two other businesses. One which is these days my largest philanthropic effort, and the other one
Yeah.
is the biggest company which I have. So
One regret I hear a lot from people who exited long ago. When they look back, they often say, "Oh, I should have taken more time to just rest and heal." It's one of the things, for example, that famously Steve Jobs also
mhm.
said. He wished he spent more time healing before he jumped into next after he was ousted out of Apple. And I'm curious how it was for you. Do you feel you rested and healed whatever needed to be healed after your 10 years at Sedo?
I didn't feel the need to be healed or anything. I wasn't. I think for one is, I think it's, if you're ousted or the company goes bankrupt or something, I'm sure that's a very different situation. In my
Mhm.
case, after 10 years, I was like, okay, it's time for someone else to take to do the next 10 years of this company.
Mhm.
So it was a very conscious choice. I still stayed on the board. It was a very peaceful transition.
Mhm.
um, I left the company in good hands, and I, I think I always had a fairly healthy work life balance. I mean, I hear from a lot of founders who work like 80,
Yeah.
90 hours. I was never that way. I always try to work very productive in my 40, 50 hours I work, but to not work more than that. And so I didn't have that need to really, yeah, have a complete rest or something.
How old were you?
Well, I was what, 30, 32, 33.
And at the time, you had a 6-year-old boy, right? Not six,
No, he was,
3-year-old.
yeah,
He was
yeah,
three, wasn't he?
three.
Did you feel that you wanted to uh, do something completely other than business at any point, like focus on parenting or go travel the world? Or it was clear for you that you just wanted to have more time for your angel investments?
Traveling the world is definitely something I love to do, and I'm still doing quite a bit. I've always liked to combine it with business though, so do some sort of business, do a few extra
Hmm.
days, or with a family, take some time, do remote. But I didn't feel the need to be like, okay, I'm going to be traveling the world for 2 years now.
Hmm.
That urge I didn't have. Also, I mean, kids keep you somewhat grounded in a way. They like to see their friends, to go to kindergarten or school or whatever.
Yeah,
Definitely, that makes a founder, whether exited or not, a lot more immobile than someone who's maybe in the
of
20s,
course.
has no family, and so. Yeah, for better or worse, I think that was kind of the life. And then, no, I wanted to do, and that's probably been the driving force then over the last 13 years. I wanted to take my skills, which is building companies, but also some more specific skills like software, online marketing, those sorts of things, to use it for something more purposeful, which is why I really, for the last over 10 years now, been carving myself out a niche a lot at the intersection of software and climate tech. I'm really passionate about climate tech. I think,
Mhm.
the way our economy is run, burning fossil fuels, plastic waste, all of those things, we're
Mhm.
just overutilizing the planet. I think we're setting ourselves up for a massive
Mhm.
disaster in the coming 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And so I'm very, very passionate about this topic, and I'm trying. And Ecosia was the first step, but there are others to come. Was the thing where I said, okay, I want to use my skills and actually devote them in a
Mhm.
meaningful way to something that really motivates me.
So, help me understand the evolution of your motivations. So, climate change now motivates you a lot, uh, but it probably not is not why you started Sedo. I know you started coding at 15, so I assume there is an element of just interest and love for coding. But what was
Right.
your original motivation to start the company, and how that changed through the exit, through your sequels and angel investing until today, and brought you to this place where you are so passionate about climate change?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as a teenager, definitely I like coding, and I started quite early with that. And then I just wanted to build a company. That was my primary motivation. And yeah, Cedo obviously had no climate angle, had no larger
Mhm,
purpose, so to say. It was a
mhm,
good digital marketplace for domains, but I wouldn't say there was a deeper meaning in life to it. And I just wanted to succeed as any startup founder. I was
mhm,
always passionate about the climate in a way that I was raised in Freiburg, which is a very green, smaller eco city in
mhm.
Germany. It's one of the most eco-friendly cities in Europe. A lot of solar already at the end of the 90s, biking,
Yeah.
public transportation, recycling, the usual things. And I think that was always my worldview. Is like we got to live within our planetary boundaries. It just basically for the time I was running a startup, those values were they were still there, but they were not at the forefront of my life. And I
Mhm,
think that definitely has changed after the exit because, of course, the exit also frees one from the primary means of needing to make money right now.
mhm.
And then, yeah, I was able to do that. So yeah, that's kind of what changed after the exit.
So the exit gave you this luxury of
Yes,
time,
yeah,
financial freedom to actually focus on things
yeah,
like that.
that's true.
One pattern I see a lot among exited founders,
Uh-huh.
and I definitely had it in my own experience, is that after an exit, we are carried with this really strong momentum, a really strong force to keep doing things.
Hmm.
And many of us don't actually carve out the time to stop and think and process the previous experience, but also to decide what it is we we want out of life and who we are. And it takes about a decade for people to actually rebalance and get to the point when they uh, really dig into that and start building more fulfilling, more purposeful lives because they finally understand what it is they want in life and who they are. I would be very curious to see how you went about this. Did you let that momentum carry you and how you feel about that? Or did you at any point decide consciously, I want to stop doing business and focus on something else?
No, I never did. And to the day, I still run for-profit businesses. So I split
Mm-hmm,
my time between the climate world and the pure software world. Um,
mm-hmm.
I think being an entrepreneur at heart, I also just like building companies, no matter
Yeah.
kind of what they do. Sure, they shouldn't
Mm-hmm,
be doing, I guess, something very bad to the world or something, but a software company is first and foremost neutral. It's neither good nor bad. And I think I still also, for example, I enjoy we're building SaaS Group as one of the companies, and I enjoy building a remote company with a lot of people from all over the world who
mm-hmm.
also very often live in different places, a very fluid system of also free thinkers, very autonomous, very so building a great company with a great operating model, I also find very fulfilling, and I think we're
Yeah.
also in a positive way touching people's life. I'm also, by the way, dealing with a lot of exited founders because we're buying companies, small companies,
Mm-hmm,
usually enterprise value is about $5 million on average.
mm-hmm,
ARR is usually 1 to 5 million, and most of those founders have bootstrapped those companies. So then it is actually a life changing exit. It
mm-hmm.
is one if you're somewhat frugal, you can retire. So now I'm very often on the other side. I deal with founders who go into this. And it's also interesting because some I see are very, for them, the exit is a huge change in their life, and others just carry on. So I see also both worlds, and
Yeah.
so. But back to your question, I really enjoy running company, and I'm running this company, and I enjoy that, or the ad blocking company, although there I'm only at the board. But I'm really enjoying running good companies, software companies as
Mhm.
well. In addition to
Mhm.
financing climate founders and bringing that part forward. And I think that's the part which is hard to, I would be hard to let go for me, given that I really enjoy doing what I do.
You wrote this fantastic article on bootstrapper mindset, which I can very much relate to because all my companies were
Cool.
bootstrapped. And sometimes I feel, oh, did I choose to do things the hard way by doing that? Or was it the right decision? You know, we all question those things. But I'd love you to talk a little bit about your view on bootstrap mindset. What do you mean by that? And whether it's a good thing for a founder to keep that after they exited their company for their next repeat businesses.
Yeah, no, great that you read that, and great that your businesses were also bootstrapper businesses. And what I mean by that is really that the absence of money, and I think you can transform some of those thinking into, on the personal level, on an exit or pre-exit versus post-exit world, is that I see a lot of bootstrap companies. I also see a lot of VC backed companies. And what I really admire about the bootstrap companies is their frugality, their focus on customer satisfaction, their focus of just building a great product, their focus on maximum efficiency, not just hiring someone, but actually very often then solving the problem at the root cause.
Mhm.
Um, and we've at SaaS Group, we've bought some amazing businesses. So we've bought two businesses now where both in both times the founder was running the business alone and
Mhm.
made 2 million in revenue with obviously a
Mhm.
huge profit margin,
Mhm.
uh, just purely alone by super efficient processes. And to me, that's the opposite of a lot of VC backed companies, which also might make 2 million, but they
Mhm.
burn 5 million. And very often they don't grow that much more, but they just add a lot of
Yeah.
layers. And I think that thinking is I think a very healthy thinking. It's also it's a minimalist thinking, which I think is also what the world needs, is kind of the less is more mantra. I think it's also quite healthy for people to just not start to amass stuff and buy stuff, because same as what companies do, they get a lot of money from VCs. They start hiring people
Mhm.
without thinking. And so I have deep respect for bootstrap founders if they can do it. And that's the big catch, is an if, because I think there are a lot of businesses. To end that praise for bootstrap founders maybe a little bit, there are a lot of businesses where you need VC for. Like if you have,
Mhm.
for example, hardware heavy stuff, which we have in climate tech quite a bit. You're building certain factories, certain processes. It's not
Mhm.
SaaS where you can start things bootstrapped. VC plays a
Mhm.
super crucial role in bringing the ecosystem in a lot of areas forward. I think the mistake we're just making is spoiling areas, especially in software, which are really well run and which have this great bootstrapper mindset with too much cheap money, or we used to. I think that was really, I think that article I wrote in 2020, 21, which was probably the worst time
Mhm.
in terms of a lot of free cheap money. And that's when I think it also, like, just like a lot of money can make people unhappy
Mhm.
after an exit, which I'm sure through your interviews you know a lot more than I do, and I'm sure
Mhm.
you're seeing that quite a bit. A lot of money can also make companies unhappy and
Mhm.
unproductive, and
Yeah.
so that's kind of keeping a healthy balance. I think that's one of the hardest
Yeah.
things.
I think another problem is that incentives
Yeah,
of VCs and
right,
founders are not
right.
necessarily aligned. In fact, they usually are not. But you are now playing the role of the VC. How are you ensuring that your companies that you invest in keep this bootstrapper mindset? And how do you reconcile it with a natural desire of a venture capitalist that the company grows as fast and as big as possible?
That's a great question, and it's a hard fight because within our VC fund, I am I am the software bootstrapper by heart, and so I know quite a bit about how to build a company, and usually kind of the voice of reason when it comes to keep your burn down. How do you increase efficiency? That's really what I tend to be good at companies. While I also know that you need to think big, you need
Hmm.
to have a great vision, you need to have multiple funding rounds for some of the bigger companies, and
Hmm.
so I think me and my co-founders, we also in a way act as balancing factors there. They're both from the VC world, and uh, they understand, for example, the VC metrics quite well, and they would push for kind of thinking bigger, which is also a super important skill, one which I
Hmm.
sometimes lack as a bootstrapper. And I'm the one who's sometimes the voice of reason. I think at the end of the day, any good startup needs both.
Hmm.
And you constantly balance. You have certain periods where you need one more than the other, but all great companies have elements of both.
Hmm.
And so I think in the mix, it's fine again, but it sometimes can be almost a little battle between the worlds.
Another idea of yours, which I found very interesting, and I want us to talk about it, is how at some point you realize that you're better at scaling companies than starting and building something new. I think this is extremely important because what I see quite a lot is when somebody who is a natural creator after an exit starts investing into other people's companies just to realize a few years later that they're
Hmm.
totally bored. They're not interested because what they want is to get their hands dirty and go back to creating. But by that time, they've usually wasted a lot of time and money and created this negative feeling about the whole experience. And some of them end up retiring completely, which I think is a tragedy for not just for them, but for our society as well. So I'd love to hear how you realize that you should focus on scaling and whether you still think it was the right realization for you.
Yeah, no, for me it was definitely the right thing, and I think you said it very well. There are some people who go back right into building, and for some it's great because I mean some of the best founders I know, they're actually builders. They're builders who build stuff from zero to one. Um, and their best use of talent is really keep building things and then selling them. And I know some people who are super successful at that, and that's a skill I
Hmm.
have deep respect because it's not my skill. My skill is really seeing something that is there and making it bigger. And I think for me probably the aha effect came through both Ecosia as well as Adblock, is where in
Hmm.
both cases I'm not the inventor of the product.
Hmm.
It was the inventor of someone else, but they both struggled with building a company. They were at the very early stages. One, Adblock was a complete hobby
Hmm.
project. Ecosia was very small, and I could see that my biggest value add is really helping them scale, but not
Hmm.
just giving advice, but actually also getting my hands dirty. And that's what I enjoy doing. And I think that was also at the end of the day what led me to start SaaS Group, because there we do it in a systematic fashion, because we see a
Hmm.
lot of founders with SaaS Group who come to that 1 to 5 million mark in revenue, but that's almost like a glass ceiling for a lot of founders. It's like when a company grows beyond a family size, like 5, 10 people, that's when you
Hmm.
start actual need to start real management,
Yeah.
and that's where a lot of founders just don't like it anymore. They don't
Yeah.
enjoy their job. They burn
Yeah.
out. They get stressed.
Yeah.
We've seen founders who don't take a single day of vacation, and then they go through this realization process, and
Hmm.
they're like, well, maybe someone else can take that off, and we come in
Hmm.
and we know exactly what to do, and we bring in the right GMs, the right general
Hmm.
managers, we bring in the right skills, and then it doesn't always work. Sometimes there's also a glass ceiling in the market and the company just stays at a million revenue or something, and that's okay. But we've
Hmm.
taken a lot of those companies then from a million to 10 million, And for us, it's really okay. That's very quote unquote simple execution. Still a lot of sweat and work, but that's what our playbook is, and that brings tremendous value. And the founders go back to starting something and are super happy. Um,
Hmm.
and so it's kind of a, yeah, it's almost the opposite to my own skills, but yeah, I guess that's the older you get, the more you know what you're good at and what not.
I'm very curious to find out how you reached that wisdom and at what point, because in Sedo you were there from zero
Right,
to one, right? And then stayed on. So you stayed through that critical moment when a lot of founders realized that they cannot scale the company. So you had that whole experience from zero to all the way to, I think the company was valued like 200 million when you left, right?
right.
So you stayed through the whole cycle. How and why did you realize that your particular skill is scaling and not zero to one?
When I bought or invested into, as a majority investor, into those two businesses, into Ecosia and Adblock. And at the
Hmm.
same time, I also dabbled with one or two ideas where they were basically concept stage, which I would have taken from really zero to one.
Hmm.
And I didn't think about this. It was not a conscious process, but I kept gravitating to both Adblock and Ecosia, which I
Yeah.
was so fascinated by both of them. Like Ecosia is like, okay, well, you take the most profitable thing of the internet
Hmm.
and you do something extremely meaningful with it, namely planting trees, and you can scale that indefinitely. And you also attack a really Goliath competitor, in this case, Google,
Hmm.
on a value base. I found this like super intriguing, this idea, and Adblock as well. Like we had like 5 million users back then, um, where you could erase the entire online advertising
Hmm.
for these users, help them with their internet experience, also with their CO2 footprint, because it's ads
Yeah.
are actually consuming quite a bit of the CO2 footprint. And we already had 5 million users. And it was very clear to see how we got the 5 to 50, which we did within like 2 years. And now we're at 500. So
Hmm.
I think I naturally gravitated towards
Yeah.
those. And the other ones were like, well, wait a minute, should I really sit there for 2 years and flush out the concept and the first website and acquire the first users? And it it was not a conscious process, but it just didn't resonate with me.
So it sounds like you listened to your own reaction to
Yeah,
those two options. You were
yeah,
more excited about scaling something rather than starting from scratch. So like if you were genuinely the zero to one person, it would probably be the other way around. You
right.
would be bored by the idea scaling, but very excited by the idea of starting. Okay, that's great. That's awesome. So, can we now talk about how getting wealth affected you? I know in your case it didn't happen at once, but I'm mostly curious about how it affected your motivation in life and why you continued doing what you're doing, even though I assume you could also stop doing business.
It's a little bit like, again, comparing to a company. I'm always advocating for not giving too much money at once, but giving it kind of while you grow.
Hmm.
You need to learn to spend money, and companies and people are no different. Companies are
Hmm.
also run by people at the end of the day. So, I mean, generally, I would describe what how I how I approach this is I live a fairly frugal life. Like I
Hmm.
bike to work. I don't have any luxurious hobbies. Sure, things grow over time, and it's obviously not average, but still, I think I've always tried to be super low key and very down to earth, which is probably also a bit of the German heritage.
Yeah.
On the negative side, I think what people say in Germany about founders and wealth is that it's unlike in the US, where I've lived for a couple of years, for 3 years. it's somewhat inappropriate to show things too offensively,
Mhm.
and to celebrate wealth. And sure, there are people who are different, but it's overall compared, is there's definitely things are always a little bit more toned down,
Mhm.
for better or worse. Yeah, we also celebrate entrepreneurial cultures
Mhm.
less, which of course leads to lower founder rates, lower success rates there. So I think it has a flip side, but I would say on the side of how people then live their lives, maybe sometimes it's healthy, but I guess at the end of the day, yeah, we're all within the culture we grew up
Yeah.
in. I think that German heritage is part of that, but overall, I think that I would argue that that has helped me because I live a super normal life.
So there was not much shock for you because
No,
you already because first of all, uh, wealth came in
yeah,
stages, and second, culturally, you were prepared to not be
right.
affected too much.
And I also reinvested a lot. So
Mhm.
I keep the liquid part to a small portion, and I've invested most of my money is again invested
Mhm.
in companies, invested in some philanthropic efforts like Ecosia.
Mhm.
I'm also these days doing a bit more pure philanthropy, and also climate, quite a bit, climate protection, and so it's really something that I made very conscious effort to put my money also back into the circle, but for yeah, building companies. And sure, that's on the one side, it's chasing, quote unquote, chasing more money.
Mhm.
um, but it's not the money that motivates me. It's, I think, as most founders, it's actually the wanting to win in a way, and wanting to be proving that you can actually build cool stuff with the money, build cool stuff out of nothing. I think that's I would argue that that's what's driving the motivation of most founders, including me. And so it felt kind of natural to just invest that back.
So it's a combination of competitiveness and
Yeah.
love for what
Hmm.
you're doing, loving the game
Yeah.
and loving. Let's talk about how you dealt with the change in your identity. So you were the CEO of one of the largest marketplaces for domain names in the world, and then you stepped down. Was it a problem at any point for you that you no longer were the CEO and co-founder of a well-known brand?
There were a couple of people I knew who were friends, and some are still friends, and others I lost track over the years. Um, but there were also a lot of other people where it's like, yeah, it's okay, they were business partners and nothing more, and I'm not in touch anymore, so it's okay. But it was, I wouldn't say it was a big identity. Maybe it would have been, and if I would have done nothing else after that. But I think I fairly quickly went into then, for example, the ad block business. So I had a kind of I had a role, and to me, it's a lot about is this. Some of my co-founders, they tell this like the party question. Like if at a party someone asks, "What do you do?" They
Hmm.
struggle with that, or some struggle with
Yeah.
that because they're not doing anything. And
Yeah.
that I never had that because I went kind of fairly seamlessly from one thing to the next one. But I can see how identity plays a role if you don't have that.
It hits hardest the people who take a break, and then socially it's very difficult. But
Yeah,
also internally, in terms of understanding who we are, it becomes very challenging. And if we have enough time, we start facing into that abyss
right.
of our own soul, and it can get very scary to understand
Yeah.
who we are. Um, okay, so how about parenting and family? How these things were affected by you no longer working full time?
That part we can probably skip fairly quickly because I don't think they were affected, at least
Okay.
not in the short run. I mean, given that I lead a fairly normal life, it was always quite stable over the years. Kids go to school. Sure, maybe the house is a little bigger than the
Mhm.
average, but it's also not outrageous. It's not a villa or something. Again, very low key. I don't think it was materially affected in any way. And yeah, it came to stages, and also the work. I think I always, and that was very important for me. I always tried to maintain a really healthy work life balance, but even when I was still working at Cedo. So
I
yes, I travel. There are weeks where I travel a bit, but on the other side, I mean, most people do if they're in the business world, or also if they're employed, and it was never outrageous or something.
I interviewed another German a few weeks ago, Tony
Yeah.
Kula. I don't know if you, and that was another person who told me, no, I had such a beautiful work-life balance even before the exit, so everything was fine. I'm very curious about that. How did you guys, or you in particular, um, manage building such a super successful company as Cedo while working, as you said, 50 hours a week?
I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, the secret is always also good delegation. And I think, you can
Hmm.
delegate equally well in 40 hours than you can do in 60 or 80 hours or something.
Hmm.
Um, Also, work has diminishing returns. I mean, sometimes now I have stretches of work, like in the summer, for example, when we traveled the US, I worked very little, maybe 2 hours on average a day. I got all the major stuff done. Um, eh, but of course, yeah, the difference between 0 and 2 hours is quite a lot. The difference between 8 hours and 10 hours is not that big, because then, yeah, I might
Yeah,
just go,
is
also
really.
going in circles in some cases. Yeah, and so yeah, maybe that is a European thing to a certain extent. Again, for better or worse, I'm definitely not judging it either way, because I think
Yeah.
also, let's be frank, Europe has not brought any tech successes on the level of the US, like by far. Like even the most successful ones, whether it's Spotify or it's SAP, which is a bit older,
Hmm.
it dwarfs the Googles and Facebook of the world. So I think that maybe you need some more crazy people to really achieve that maximum level of success. But on a personal level, of course, also money. I was just talking about diminishing returns. Money has very diminishing returns. So the difference between 0 and 1 million is fairly big. Also, between 1 and 10 is still very big. The difference between 10 and 100 million, I would argue, is negligible in your personal life.
Yeah.
In terms of real happiness, it probably doesn't buy you anything. And so, and still, of course, it's fun. You said about the competitiveness and the loving of the game. I think still there's a motivation to go higher, but in terms of a healthy work-life balance, it's absolutely not necessary. And I think Europeans tend to be, through all levels, from founders, same as employees, tend to be more on this level. Hey, let's take it a little easy. Again, for
Hmm.
better or worse. Not judging either way here, but I think it's
Yeah.
through the fabrics of society on all levels, including founders.
Talking about that, what do you think your parents' role was in you becoming entrepreneurial? So, for example, I know you have a 16-year-old and an 11-year-old now. What it is you do as a parent, if anything, to support them being more entrepreneurial?
I don't support them to be entrepreneurial, to be honest.
Okay. Hmm.
Not if you mean entrepreneurial in the terms of business. You were asking about the role of also my parents, and I think it's something I'm trying to also be as a father, is to just encourage them to do whatever they want to do,
Hmm.
to encourage them to do what they like, to praise them for what they do well, but to not nudge them into an area. Also, I'm not from an entrepreneurial family. I'm not. Uh, my father was a doctor.
Hmm.
I have to say though, and maybe there are some commonalities. He was a very entrepreneurial doctor in a way that he went into a
Hmm.
completely new field, established that in Germany, was non-existent then in the 70s, built this up from the groundwork. So in his field, he was very entrepreneurial. So, but I was the first founder and business person probably
Hmm.
for a long time in the family. And yeah, I'm trying to do this. Is just encourage kids what they like to do, and they should find their path, but they should in no way be pressured or even manipulated into doing what I do. In fact, my younger son, he tends to always say, "Is like your job must be super boring. All you do the whole day is sit in front of your computer, write emails, have Zoom calls, and phone calls. Is like I would never do your job."
Almost any kind of job these days requires you to sit in front of a screen. That's a problem.
That's true. Yeah, reality will catch up, but unless he does something very different, then
If you sold your business for the first time today, what would you do differently than what you did?
it's hard to say because every situation is unique. I mean, our situation in a way was, I think we made every mistake in the book. So when we started Sedo in 2001, we took a 40% investment from a strategic for
Mhm.
400,000. So
Yeah.
post money valuation of 1 million, we gave away 40% kind of on day one,
Yeah.
and that's obviously every mistake you can do. Now,
Yeah.
was it, could we have been more successful? I don't know, because they also helped us a ton. Like the company, the strategic partner was the second biggest web hosting company worldwide, after
Mhm.
GoDaddy. So they're the European GoDaddy, and there were so many synergies in our markets that it was like the perfect fit. And
Yeah.
there were very tangible things we got out of that, and maybe we would not have gotten bigger. Maybe we would have gotten bigger. Maybe GoDaddy would have paid
Mhm.
twice for us if we would have been independent. I don't know. So, but yeah, it's certainly something. If someone asked me today, that's what I would consider at the founding time, because then at the exit time we didn't really have much choices. We already had like a shareholder. They also had a majority then option, and they had structured that very well. And so we had a really good relationship, but we didn't have much leverage in then selling the remaining parts. And so, of course, we kind of maneuvered us into a pretty bad situation. They were super fair. I mean, the prices, everything was all cool. So I have no regrets on the exit side. But of course, it was setting things up in the beginning, is really kind of what I would advise everyone to do different. Is okay, take it
Yeah.
step by step, take some value at angels first, but also, hey, it was 2001, the markets were collapsed after the dot-com bust.
Mhm.
There was no angel network. It was a completely different situation. So it's
Yeah.
really hard to compare those two things.
On the personal level, if we're talking about after your exit, do you think you should have done anything differently in the past 13 years?
There's so many options, and a friend who also had an exit a few years before me, I still remember what he advised me during my exit. He said, well, the hardest thing is that suddenly so many options open up.
Yeah.
And I still remember that advice because that was true. It was at the end of the day that wealth of options, that was one of the hardest things, to just being able to do so many things.
Hmm.
And do I know if some of the other options would have been better? Do I know what those options are? I mean, I can all I of course I talk to a lot of founders who've also had exits, and some are
Yeah.
very happy, some are very unhappy, just like in the general population. And they pursue all very different options. Would they have been my options? Would have been some other options were better? It's really hard. It's really hard speculations. I really don't know.
You've seen many businesses, you've invested in many businesses, you have friends who exited businesses and started them again. Why do you think statistically 70% of repeat businesses fail?
Oh, is that a stat? I didn't know that. That's so. You're saying 70% of the founders who start something new, they fail.
Exited founders, yeah,
Exited founder.
repeat
Interesting.
business. I find this absolutely fascinating because you would think that we are, as exited founders, positioned so well for success. And okay, some of us, like you, are very wise and we decide to not start new businesses, but rather invest into someone else's businesses. But those who do start new businesses, the statistics is horrendous,
Interesting.
especially given that the venture capital community is so willing to give us money.
Right. those 70% is probably still better than the failure statistics of first time founders, right? What is that in comparison?
But that's interesting because 80% of all businesses fail. Yeah, I was shocked when I first came across that, and
Yeah,
I started like really looking into that. And I like asking people like you who have seen many businesses.
I can think of two reasons.
Hmm.
One is that you just don't sweat as hard for the second time. A
Yeah,
lot of, in my personal experience, a lot of the founders I've met, they treat sometimes their second business as a lifestyle business. It kind of runs on the side. They're not fully committed to it, and that people notice that. So
yeah.
that's number one. And the second one is that we always look at individual founders, but very often it's the team, or it's also the combination. And the team is the combination of individuals with different strengths and weaknesses. And so, Sedo, for example, we were four founders and
Hmm.
with very different skill sets, very complementary. Now, just taking out one person and giving that person money is like, hey, run with it. You were successful once, because very often it's not the same team. It's then one person
Yeah.
wanting to prove that he or she can do that alone, different combinations. It's not the same team. And what did work in the first team doesn't work in the second team.
Hmm.
Sometimes it works. That's, I guess, the 30%. So
Yeah.
the rate is still a little higher than with a regular founding population, but I think it's the combination of those two things. I don't know what else. What are the other things you're hearing?
Overconfidence.
Okay.
Overconfidence
Uh
is
huh.
one thing because we think, oh, we succeeded once, we'll succeed again. And that actually feeds into the problem that you mentioned, that people don't
Mm-hmm.
try as hard
Yeah.
because they're overconfident. I love asking people like you who are
Yeah.
very experienced in creating businesses after the first one, what your opinion is. And I love your two reasons. It makes a lot of sense. What do you think living in other countries and being exposed to different cultures give you on a personal level and also as an entrepreneur? Is it a good idea for someone who never lived in any foreign country and sold their business to actually experience that as part of their post-exit journey?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I think, well, as post exit or even earlier,
Well, earlier we're too busy.
we're to be, well, no, I was just about to say it starts, I think it's in your school life. And I know it's a thing more from Germany to the US than the other way around. But I did,
Hmm.
and that's why I want to mention that when I was 15, I did a high school exchange to Seattle. And I still
Hmm.
know what a profound effect the visit of Microsoft in the early 90s had to me in my entrepreneurial journey, kind of seeing what's possible there. My son at the moment is also doing high school exchange in the US, another part, but I still think it's super important, even from this early age, to be
Hmm.
exposed to other cultures.
Hmm.
I mean, there's also a reason why migrant founders are actually dominating the US super tech companies. If I look into my circles, I've very often also founded with people who are not from Germany, for example. My co founder at Adblock, Vladimir Palant, came from Moldova as a kid. Now my co-founder at the Climate Fund, Daria Saharova, she came from Latvia as a teenager, and so um, I think it's being exposed to something which is out of your comfort zone. I think that's what it's the end of the day
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Uh, Overcome resilience, prove yourself in a different setting is super important. And I only lived abroad for, I think, in total about 4 years in the United States, but still those 4 years I think were very important. It's much harder, of course, for people who permanently relocate. But those or things during your studies, I mean, I did that in Sweden. I was in Sweden for an internship and for my studies for a year. Um, Whether it's during school, during university, in early possibilities in your employment life, I think I would encourage everyone to use that Doesn't have to be permanently. If it is permanently, cool. If not,
Hmm.
even a year, 2 years, sometimes are really life changing. And I think it makes you also stronger as an entrepreneur, and more resilient, and opens up a whole new world.
Do you have a sense of purpose? And what gives you that sense?
Well, to me, it's really mostly on the climate front. I think if I would pinpoint the one problem humanity has, like sure we can argue about a lot of problems, which are problems, issues. Some of those, a lot of those are important. Important for local communities, important for certain segments of the population, and all of those are important. Don't get me wrong, and I have a lot of respect for people who work in those fields. But to me, I feel like as humanity, there's one
Hmm.
problem which is irreversible and which can basically jeopardize the life of billions of people and will jeopardize the life of everyone if we don't tackle it properly. Problem is that it's so abstract, and that is climate change, and us burning fossil fuels and just basically being on the path for such a warming that it will distort everything from agriculture, the way we live, the way we feed people, everything. And that's why to me, that's what I'm contributing to tackle, and that's probably what gives me the most sense of purpose on the actual vision part. And other than that, it's the purpose kind of in daily life is just running a company, running it well in a humble, nice, remote, smart fashion. That also kind of in a day-to-day doing probably gives me the most purpose in a very today tangible way, compared to climate change, which is yeah
Yeah,
super abstract, and
yeah.
which is part of the problem why it's hard to grasp for people.
So, how would you describe a perfectly fulfilling life for yourself?
Spending the time with people you like, and doing things that do something meaningful and not creating too much harm.
Tim, thank you so much for this interview, for your time, and for sharing your wisdom and experience with us.
Thanks for having me.